Welcome everybody, giving folks a few minutes to join up. Thanks to those of y'all who are right on time, even a tad early. We're excited to talk with you today. And we'll probably give folks just another 45 seconds or so to get logged in, but we already have a good group that has joined up. So again, thanks for being here. We'll get started in just a moment. Chris, you got any jokes prepared while we kill 30 seconds?
Listen, um, the fact that we're actually sitting here doing a seminar in AI when 2 years ago we couldn't even imagine this day, that's the joke. Eh, I was playing with VO3 last night, and it's mind-blowing what that thing is doing right now.
Indeed, indeed. We'll touch on the pace of technology change, I think, a little bit during this session and what that means for how we think through adoption and governance and all that sort of stuff. But I think we're a minute past the hour. So let me officially say good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We're going to be talking about Beyond AI Adoption, Tactics for Acceleration. I'm John Levitt. I'm one of the co-founders of Elbex, and I'll be your host today. Before we dive in, I'm just going to cover a few housekeeping items. We have 45 minutes scheduled for today, including time for Q&A at the end, but we are going to try to answer questions in real time as they come through. If you do have questions, please use the Q&A function, not the chat. That'll help us keep track and not lose your questions in the flow of the chat. Do feel free to use the chat function if you'd like to introduce yourself. Always good to get a sense of who's in the room. So feel free to use the chat for that. We are recording this session, and all registrants will receive a link to the recording and slides as soon as it's processed and ready to send. With that, today I am very glad to be joined by Chris Menon, who is the CEO of Angry Gods. I've gotten to know Chris and his team over the last year, and really excited to have him online today sharing his many insights with y'all. So with that, Chris, why don't you kick us off with a proper introduction to yourself and Angry Gods?
Hey guys, I run a small think tank called Angry Gods. We're primarily a brand and strategy consulting firm. That's what I've been doing for about 25 years. But recently, just with the advent of AI into everyday work, one of the things that we found is that our strategy consulting has been focused a lot on AI readiness within organizations, because the type of executives that we speak with, CEOs, CMOs, COOs, who are all operationally trying to make things work in this changing age, they're paralyzed by a lot of fear. And our work now, a bulk of it, about 40% of our work stems into helping companies really think through how to transition from a AI fearful construct to an AI ready construct.
Wonderful. Thanks, Chris. As for myself, again, I'm John Levitt. I'm co-founder and COO of Elbex, and Elbex is the platform that companies like Boston Globe, WordPress, Embark, many others use to deploy generative AI across their workforce. Our platform centralizes access to the leading AI models and makes sure that those models can't train on your data. That's an important part, obviously, for the governance and security. But we also provide a really consistent and compliant experience that's built specifically for enterprise needs. We make it really easy for anyone to connect their data and documentation and build powerful agents and workflows without needing any coding experience at all. And our customers, as a result of that, tend to see really great adoption rates across every part of their business, which ultimately is what gets us excited, because that's where the real transformation can happen. So yeah, we're all about automating routine tasks, making better decisions, and unlocking people to accomplish things that they thought were previously not possible due to time or skill. So obviously happy to chat more with you folks. I'm sure Chris is as well after the webinar about our companies. But for today, our goal is to really help you leave this webinar with at least one thing you feel like you can implement tomorrow, maybe even today. So I think as we go into the agenda, we might have a poll or two just to get a sense for where folks are with their personal and company adoption of AI currently. And while y'all respond to that, I'll just go on and quickly touch on our agenda for today. So the topics that we're going to primarily touch on today are formalizing AI governance, access, and policies, team objectives and structure, including performance reviews and expectations, how to approach upskilling and talent development, and then communications, an important part of this whole thing that sometimes gets missed. So these are the primary things that we'll touch on. Again, if you have questions, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom, and we will get going. So we'll see. Oh, poll results didn't pop up. There we go. Okay. Okay, so just quick check in on the poll. Where are you in your AI adoption? Looks like most people are using but still learning. And from a company perspective, most people are just getting started or still learning. 0% feel fairly sophisticated. Okay, so I think y'all are in the right place. This should be a good session today.
Yep.
So we will start with, well, the starting point, the policies that define acceptable uses, guardrails, access, overall governance. There's one thing before we get into the topic here that I really want to note before we go too far in. And I think about this from two different perspectives. Of course, clear policies are there to protect the company, the employees, and customers against a variety of risks. The other aspect of this, though, is that clear policies can do a really good job of breaking through the fear, uncertainty, and doubt from employees that are otherwise potentially apprehensive to engage for fear that they could make a mistake that might get them fired or put the customer or their business at risk. And this is like an aspect I see that's still kind of overlooked and really important to the path to accelerate adoption, which is the key to the conversation that we're having today. Chris, I know this is something that you kind of already alluded to is something that's important to the work that you're doing with your clients. So we'll talk more about this, but like, what are you seeing in the market right now?
So what's interesting is the for the companies that have been trying these, the language we hear is the early experiments worked. Now the challenge is consistency, not curiosity, right? It started very early as curiosity. And what's interesting is in most companies, the timeline for curiosity for any new thing is a long window. You have about a year to year and a half to be curious. With AI, the notion of curiosity is really, really short because the way people are actually accelerating make things happen becomes a lot faster. The second thing that we've discovered that the transitions happen very quickly is 7 months ago, it was a tech project. Now it's a business transformation. It's a really interesting kind of mindset shift, which is this notion that this is no longer an IT thing that we have to do, but this is a overarching corporate governance thing to do. And the final thing is we're moving from permission to expectation, right? Which is what was once optional is now being essential. It was about adoption was about experimentation. Acceleration is about standardization. So that's the big shift that we're seeing.
Yeah, and I think from a policies perspective, like what is your AI policy? I think historically that's meant what are the things that are allowed and what are the things that are not allowed. But we'll talk more about this today too, is what is expected of you as an employee. And part of the expectations is that you are going to use it in the ways that are approved. But it's not just an invitation and it's becoming somewhat of a mandate. And we'll talk about some of the intricacies there. The other thing I think that's really important to remember, and Chris, you also alluded to this as we were just getting started here, technology is moving so fast. And if you created a policy 2 years ago, it may be a good idea to revisit that for a lot of reasons, right? There's new capabilities that have to be considered, and that can be worked into use cases or security risks. But also, a lot of security risks probably have been solved or can be solved in different ways than were possible a couple of years ago. So if we're not consistently reviewing and keeping up with the technology as we're thinking about some of these things, that could put us at risk of falling behind. Ideally, all of this information and guidance is in a very simple place, right? Like a single document or a single folder where people can easily access it. Should be able to answer questions like, what data can I share with different AI tools? Where do I go for help if I need it internally or externally? What is expected of me as a user? Those are things that are really important to make sure are answered so that employees feel comfortable and confident starting to engage here. Now, this all is like very easy if we're asking people to just use one tool, one technology. And while of course we would love for that tool, that platform to be LVEX, we're also realistic, like AI is everywhere. So you shouldn't be limiting yourself to only one tool, but we do feel that you should have one tool that everyone can use and is expected to use, because that's where you can really put the right governance controls, observability, and everything in place that's important to feel confident, comfortable, and protected as a company here.
And John,
Um,
if
yeah,
I could just add a quick note there, this is again a completely unsolicited plug here. Uh, as independently consulting with companies that truly are fearful of the state of where AI is taking them, but unsure of which tool to use, which license to get, which specific company to actually use, which model is actually going to be better. We have found two of our clients where implementing Alvex as a abstraction layer that allows for them to actually not worry about which tools to actually think is actually going to win out, and something that allows them to abstract it above those has been super critical in adoption and comfort. So it's just something that's really interesting to know. Not that Alvex is the only choice to do that, but it is a great choice to do that.
of course. Thank you for that. Um, the technology is part of it. The often, I would say, similarly sized part of this is just the change management. And we have a question here that I think folds nicely into this next point. And the question is, what if we don't have the executive buy-in, and we have budget pressures, and how do we actually get organized, to get buy-in, to actually get the adoption that we're looking for? And so I think there's a lot that we can discuss around here now, and on some future slides here. But we, you know, I think it takes a culmination of people across the business. And sometimes it's just about making that business use case, and identifying the use cases, and starting to work with individual contributors across the business to bubble up. Well, this is why it's important. This is why it's not just an expense for the business. This is why it's a return on investment that we should expect. Often those use cases have to bubble up from the bottom versus being mandated from the top down. But yeah, that I think too often there's just some of these decisions are left to obscurity, and you start to have multiple people working on the same problem, and that's where you start to introduce a lot of inefficiency actually. So however we approach this, the conversation in a coordinated effort across the business, I think, is one of the most important things that we have to make sure that we're opening up. So just to kind of like summarize a few things that we've talked about in this section, and if you'd like to take a screenshot, you can, but we'll also share the slides with you afterwards. Really focus on simplicity with your documentation around policies and governance and things like that. Where you can, centralize onto a single tool and platform, at least for broad use cases. You may have specialized use cases that require separate solutions or add-ons to software that you're using. That's totally fine, but the more that you can centralize, it just creates a lot of ease of governance and scalability. And then, yeah, we need a governing board. We need coordination across the organization. This isn't something, especially in larger organizations, that we can expect just a single person to introduce and lead hundreds or thousands of people to success across.
Yeah.
All right. So first topic was kind of talking at the company level, setting policies that are broadly applicable to everyone. We're going to move next on to team level tactics. So good transition from the last talking point here. As we think about teams and individuals, we're getting to the point where we're saying, like, just we use AI, like it's not enough. We're looking for intentionality. We're looking for outcomes. We're looking for accountability. And as leaders, we can start by basically like setting the expectation for the rest of the business. AI will be part of every team's work. That is the expectation that I think we need to be setting at this point. There will be someone, this is our belief, there will be someone like an AI lead who is responsible for driving adoption and upskilling on specific teams. So think about a marketing team, a sales team, an operations team, finance team. Having leads in each of those groups that are focused on AI adoption and enablement can be a really important component to driving success here. And setting an expectation that these teams must report back on the success of their implementation, what they're doing, how it's going, what outcomes it's driving. That should be part of the expectation setting and the performance review process. Um, I'm curious, Chris, like again, like from your perspective, how are you are you seeing companies out there in the wild that are like mandating AI use and measuring that?
We are. And what's interesting is there's some mandates that are currently standard that we are seeing as detrimental. So I'll give you examples of that. So, for example, one of the things that they started doing early on is to essentially borrow centralized experts. Hey, here's a centralized repository of AI experts, and they will work with different teams to help you kind of organize. The problem with that is that each team, whether it's in marketing, ops, legal, product, must own its own journey to AI effectiveness because the prompt library to actually make things work within each department is actually fundamentally different. So it's almost like the mechanics of making things work in each department are different. And so the notion of AI fluency, we fundamentally believe must live within teams, not just be borrowed from centralized experts. The second thing that we see is that AI roles should be embedded, not adjunct. We don't need more AI experts. We need more AI competent teams. And the way we found that that works best is to appoint AI leads or champions within each team who guide usage, share practices, and drive experimentation within the construct of what that team does. These aren't technical roles, by the way. They're enablement roles and embedded within business units. And when we tie this responsibility to visible accountability, like quarterly OKRs or sprint rituals, etc., it becomes much better.
Yeah. How often have we seen a scenario in which an executive says, "Oh, we just need to use AI to streamline this process"? For example, I'll give you a concrete one. Hey, we're redoing our 5-year financial plan. Um, let's just plug it into AI and have it figure it out for us, right?
Mhm.
Okay. Well, in theory, it sounds great, but the practitioner on the ground who's run that model before knows all of the things that have to be accounted and all of the ways that the analysis has to be run and so on and so forth. And, you know, we need the embedded professionals on those teams doing the work, knowing the constraints, knowing the capabilities, knowing the outcomes that we're shooting for to really give the right guidance on how we can execute some of these things. Otherwise, there can be a risk of improper expectation setting or trying to do things shooting for the moon without figuring out what are the steps to actually get to the moon. We have to first like climb the first set of stairs, right? So that's where the embedded professionals with the expertise and knowledge are really, really, really incredibly important here. And intentionally structuring teams and shaping organizations with that in mind is absolutely one of the first steps to success. This can take the shape of an AI steering committee that has representation with like one person as that AI lead for each part of the organization. There can be smaller subcommittees, whatever the thing is that fits your business based on the size of your business and the structure of your business. Like that is a step to figure out if we haven't gotten to that point yet.
And then, John, one point I'd add is when it comes to recognition, we found that in the companies that reward team level innovation, not tool adoption, that's where it actually starts to really kind of accelerate, where the goal isn't just using AI, but it's designing better ways to work with it. So you end up spotlighting teams that transform process, not automate tasks because a lot of AI currently at the base level is being used to automate tasks right now, which, by the way, you could have done 10 years ago with automation tools. The truth is, there's a lot more about kind of transforming processes that I think are interesting.
Yeah, and also like just automating things that we've done before in the same ways that we've done them exactly misses the point of transformation. There may be entirely different
Exactly.
ways to think about how we solve problems today. So
Exactly.
Um, okay, so why do we bring up performance reviews and 90% of the respondents to the poll have not included any type of AI requirements in performance reviews? Should we, shouldn't we? Every company might have a different take on this, but when I was thinking about this earlier, I was thinking about, okay, let's pretend that we're back in the late 1900s. I'll pause for effect so we can all remember how old we actually are getting here. But think about, an accounting team that's doing work with pencil and paper, and maybe that's working just fine. You can imagine this is precisely whatever year you want. But now computers and the internet are becoming a thing. But I'm doing my job just fine. What's the reason to actually try to innovate? And maybe that innovation is scary because I have to take a step backward to get 5 steps forward. Well, that's precisely why I think expectation setting and including that progress in performance reviews is something that is potentially really important for employees, especially those that may be further behind in terms of like adoption or thinking about adoption. Performance reviews, remember, are should be structured as a way to give guidance to employees to help them better themselves and produce better results for themselves and the company. So if we can structure goals around AI adoption, AI use cases, AI education, I think that's doing a service to our employees and our organizations because it's giving them the right push and the right guidance to take the steps that are required to get them into the next stage of what work looks like in the AI era. That's my take on it anyway.
Yeah, makes sense.
So a little bit of a summary slide on some of the stuff that we just talked through, and the graphic on the bottom I'll just highlight quickly. So depending on the size of the team that we're working with, I think we're going to have different expectations about how dedicated or how much percentage of time AI leads, quote unquote, are spending on specifically AI enablement, investigation, use cases, all those sorts of things. So there's of course going to be some variability. We have to be creative with understanding our own organizations and what's required there, but hopefully this will give some guidance and framework to start to think through those decisions.
So one of the things we want to talk about is how to approach upskilling and talent development in an organization, because AI fluency right now is the new digital literacy, right? Just the way we used to think about the web as being something we needed to get our organization literal about. And for those of you who have been in organizations long enough to remember that time back in the early 2000s, the late 90s, it was one of those things where you actually said to people, well, there's this thing called the web and we're going to start using it more. But that just isn't even a context right now. So just like Excel and email once redefined office productivity, prompt fluency and AI fluency are now table stakes for modern language work, and we just need to figure out how to push that out. So building an agenda for that, that's important. The second thing to really think about this is that it's a program that you put in place. And we've found that companies that do this, put the syllabus in place, really create massive value and acceleration, which is a program that builds skills that scale with the business. It's not just a one-time training, it's a capability building engine that grows with us. Now, you are going to, by the nature of training, take people who are in your organization and then push them out to other organizations when they move to take those skills away. But that's okay. It's the rising tide that lifts all boats. You need to make sure that there's literacy in order to make sure that things are better. Third, prompting is a language, and language is power. So if you think about, you can't govern or scale what you don't understand. The analogy that I always use is how people talk to their dogs like humans, and you find that when you talk to your dog like a human, that dog is almost untrainable. If you look at those people that actually coddle their dog and kind of talk to them like they're absolutely human and treat them like humans, they're not as trainable as the pets and the dogs that actually work and are treated like actual dogs. And so in the context of that, one of the things you have to think about is how do you speak to AI? And AI has made it very easy. The models have made it very easy for you to actually create prompts that use just about any kind of language you want, and it'll give you something that feels like a little bit of a magic. It's going to give you something that makes you feel like I have something there. But if we treat prompt design as a core 21st century skill set, like writing or data literacy, we're going to find that we do a lot better. Now, what I love about an application, and I'll have John talk about this in a second, but what LVEX can do, or platforms like LVEX can do, is it can actually take the ability for you to write something which is not properly prompt structured and create a prompt out of it, which actually takes away some of the need for instant literacy. But over time, it's about good prompting is not about tricking the model. It's about aligning what I call intent, clarity, and creativity. So we'll give you a slide next, which gives you a little bit more of an overview of a syllabus. And then finally, operationalizing behavior in AI is by creating a behavioral mode that comes from proper training. And so, from our perspective, that new grammar, that prompt engineering construct, that iterative thinking with AI, why AI is a partner, not a tool, how to guide a model through a series of tasks in a way that it understands and gives you the right output, and then giving you tool fluency and ecosystem awareness of what's out there can all be done through a proper syllabus. And when combined with a tool like Alvex, it starts to give you a much faster way of getting there. So, John, any thoughts on that?
Tons, yeah. But I'll keep it short because I want to make sure we have time for the rest of the content. One thing I will say though, I go to a lot of tech conferences and AI conferences, and I'm somewhat shocked by how often I hear people on stage saying that everyone knows how to prompt by now. It's been years. But people are still picking up this software for the first time, and they absolutely don't know how to prompt. And even people who have been using it for years um, may or may not know how to prompt correctly. And so as we're thinking about accelerating the adoption rates through our workforce, we do have to have some empathy and understanding that people are at different stages of their learning and understanding and their journey with AI. And to the degree that we can, like we want to meet them where they are. So that's one of the things that like Alvex is doing in our product here. Let's say you want to create an agent to do a certain thing. We just ask you, tell us what you're trying to do, like what is the outcome you're trying to get to, and then we'll ask some follow-up questions, and then we will create the instructions for that agent without you having to do all of the prompt engineering yourself. Like those are the things that I think really help lower the barrier to entry. But then there's also like tricks that you can learn along the way too, where people are are like really wowed sometimes when they're trying to do something with Lbex or ChatGPT or Claude, whatever it is, and they're not getting the response that they're hoping for. Like you can just ask, why did you do it that way? Why did you give me the response that you gave me? How can I instruct you to do what I actually want you to do? And these models will tell you, like they'll give you the answer. They'll give you the instructions for how to do it. And so it's like little tips like that that we can pick up and start to make our teams aware of so that they can get a lot farther faster. So yeah, much more I'm sure we could talk about on this side, but we'll keep it moving for the sake of time here.
So, uh, comms becomes an incredibly important structure or a structural construct for companies once you actually start this adoption, once you start to put a syllabus in place. So, some basic elements around this is to set the vision, right? Which is what is the overall vision of AI as a strategic imperative, where we need to be talking about not using AI as a tool to replace people, but we're using it to empower them. So, framing AI as a threat, not as a threat, but as a force multiplier becomes important. Second, the notion of human creativity is the point. So the power of AI is shaped by the quality of human thinking behind it. That's an incredibly important underscoring that we need to put in, where the tools are only good as the intent and the input. So putting that out as a comms strategy is incredibly important. Third is that governance is innovation infrastructure where responsible AI is good business, right? Guardrails don't slow us down, but they give us room to run because a lot of times people look at guardrails in the old way traditional IT has put guardrails. I can't go to this website. I can't go do this. I can't use Facebook. It's giving me all these things that I can and cannot do. Guardrails for AI really should be about creating responsibility and ethical behavior in a way that still moves things forward. And then ultimately, this is really about cultural transformation, not a tech upgrade. That's a really important message. This idea that when you have, this is bigger than the new tools, it's about new ways of working, normalizing continuous learning and internal experimentation, inviting cross functional participation where every AI is everyone's job right now, and getting people to understand that adding that skill set of prompt engineering, going through the syllabus, learning it is a reason why they'll not only become better for the company, but they'll become more saleable as a person themselves for their next job. Um, John, any thoughts on that?
Uh, Loads, but I think I'm just going to move us to the next slide because we're starting to run a little bit short on time. Still have plenty, but no, I think really good points made. And I'll just highlight the results from the poll that we just ran here, which highlight that 70% of CEOs have not sent a memo on AI for their employees. and basically 90% of respondents are not happy with the internal communication on AI. So I think really big opportunities. These are really important parts of the whole equation here. And honestly, they don't have to be daunting, right? We just have to get coordinated on messaging and a little bit of strategy and make sure that we're messaging out properly to employees. And then also like repeating that messaging. I think that's a mistake that I see often. It's not just specific to AI, but sometimes we feel like, oh, we've sent the memo, now it's out there, people know it. But no, you probably have to repeat it weekly for a couple months before people like really start to get the message. So that repetition, I think, is extremely important as part of this equation here.
Yeah. And then in terms of a comm strategy, right? What we just talked about, this notion of having an internal comm strategy that pulls together multi-channel communication, executive AI briefings, feedback mechanisms that come together. The things that we used to do for the other things that we did as a company, it all falls into standard mechanics. AI has to become part of the culture. It has to become part of an organizational transformation that says we are moving from this point of cultural integration to this point of cultural integration using AI as the mechanic to do that.
Yeah, there's a few things on this slide that I think are that I really like to hackathon. We won't go through every single word on the slide here, but you can read it again. We'll share it out afterwards. Um, to get engagement, I think like making sure that we're sharing and celebrating wins. If someone has an idea that goes into production and produces great results, like share that across the company loud and proud, get people excited and inspired by it. If you're having trouble figuring out how to get started, hackathons are a great idea that I've seen work well at many companies. And it doesn't have to be, it shouldn't be engineers, right? These like we're asking for business user hackathons where you can give some dedicated time to just get started thinking about problems and just noodling on some solutions for them. I think one of the biggest parts about sort of like the slowness factor for getting adoption is like we do have to ask people to create time in their day to try something new that they need to learn about for the first time and start to experiment with. It's hard to do that if you're like still handling the same load of meetings and workflow on a day-to-day basis. So carving out some time can be a really good way to start to inspire some growth here. And the last is like, competitions and just things that are creative. We've seen customers that have done like a weekly competition, like who can generate an image that most closely matches this prompt and or is like the most creative. Those types of things, they might not directly align to like the business outcomes that you're looking to, but they will indirectly because it's going to get people engaged, it's going to get people experimenting, and it's going to get people just thinking differently about this technology and how and where it can be applied. So lots of stuff that Krish and I would be happy to follow up more on if y'all are looking for additional ideas and things to take back to the office.
There's a couple of things that I just want to add really quickly to this that might be
Oh,
super
yeah.
helpful for you guys. Short internal videos of how I'm using AI from the senior most executives is incredibly helpful. It's a very vulnerable place for a senior executive to say, "Hey, this is what I've been experimenting with," and even showing some of the failures of what didn't work and why it didn't work is really, really helpful. The second thing is to create an AI champions network, which is to identify the people who are adapting faster than others across the company and actually bring them together into kind of an AI champions network that go out and kind of evangelize AI for you within the organization. Think of them as the new AI rock stars, but it might be the accounting person who actually is doing really, really well. It might be someone in HR. It's just interesting to find those people and kind of elevate them. So those are two ideas.
I love the stories we see for like the entry level SDR, who's the one who builds the thing that everyone starts using. That's the new possibility with AI. So it's super
Mhm.
fun. Um, just a quick slide. We got two more left. So if you do have questions that you want to pose to myself or Krish, please use the QA function and we'll get to those in just a moment. But we have a customer, Embark. They're an accounting consultancy that is a great example of going through this journey. And Krish, I think your team had something to do with this here as well. But if you look at standard adoption rates, just do some web research and see what standard adoption rates look like in companies today. It's like starting 10, 20%. Embark was able to get up to 72% adoption pretty quickly within 6 months. And it all started with, going basically through the slides in this deck. It's, okay, there's an opportunity here for us to adopt new technology and stand out and lead the market. So this is something that leadership identifies we must start working on. We have to put policies and guidelines into place so that we can make sure that we're doing this responsibly. Check. We have to get a team together so that we can talk about where can this be applied, what are the use cases, how do we do it. That's your AI committee that, it brings the information from the team level up into the executive conversation. Um, what platform are we going to use? Are we going to go to OpenAI or Gemini, or they chose Elbex, luckily for us. It's been a great partnership. But once that tool is in place, and all right, now we have to onboard. So what does that look like? They had a really interesting way that they thought about onboarding, which was to basically stair step it. So it wasn't like, hey, let's do fully agentic automated AI stuff right from the beginning. It was like, let's just get people signed into the platform. That's it. Step one. Let's get them sending some prompts. Step two, let's get them using some assistants and agents that we have built for them to use. Great. Now let's see if we get any hand raisers that want to build their own and share those with their colleagues. Great. So you create this mechanism by which people are engaged and increasing their capabilities, but also in that process, sharing lots of information back to the organization, which becomes really, really valuable. So we have a more complete case study written up. We can share that when we share the slides and the recording from here as well. But great example of a company that has kind of like fully bought in, thought really strategically and thoughtfully implemented, AI, and I think their business is seeing lots of good results in return. Chris, I don't know if there's anything additional to add here from your perspective.
No, they're a 600 plus person organization, had never thought about AI in context before, but I think this really comes from leadership, really saying that this needs to be a mandate, but then allowing them the ability to essentially evangelize it within the organization. And 100% an abstraction tool like Alvex was incredibly important for that process because it allowed for all of the pieces to sit in one place. It allowed for security elements and infrastructures to be available, and it allowed for the organization to see what others were doing, which is very hard to do when you're doing independently on something like ChatGPT.
Yeah. All right. So I think we'll bring it all home here. This is our last slide, and then we can take questions. But make sure we're being deliberate. Um, I'll say one thing that does not work is just, a CEO saying, hey, we're going to do AI. Everyone go figure out how you can do AI and 10x yourselves. Doesn't work like that. We have to be intentional with our goals, the outcomes that we're looking for, how we're doing it. That needs to be communicated really well. If we're doing that, we have a good chance of success. If not, I think we're leaving way too much risk on the table. Um, we also, I would say, see a fair amount of just fear of the uncertain future of AI, which could be both like, you see every couple of weeks, there's a new model that's on top of the leaderboards, and, there's companies that are suing the AI platforms. And so, like, what does that mean for the future? And that uncertainty can cause stagnation and stalemate. And I would say we don't have the ability to yield to that at this point. AI is here. It is the future of work. It is the today of work. And we need to find ways to start adopting it confidently. Um, we need to just like commit and move forward, basically. And the longer we delay, the more uncertainty we communicate to our employees, and the harder it is for them to really believe that we've made a decision and action plan that we're confident in. So there's some balance there, but I would say like we have to run forward. We can't crawl forward at this point. Um, Scaling expertise is difficult. I would never expect 100% of people in a short period of time to be experts in AI. It will accumulate over time. The sooner we can start, the faster, the more compounding effect that we have. And so again, it's really important just to get people hands-on, using, experimenting, being creative, and you'll start to see amazing things happening from unexpected places. We touched on this before. Horizontality is not a word that I've used often, but I think an important one in this context because it allows us to consolidate the way that we're doing things when it comes to AI and technology in general, and it gives us more control, more governance, and just better centralization to have the effect that we want to have, especially in these earlier days where, again, going back to the earlier poll, most of the attendees on this webinar today are at the earlier stage of this journey. There is a huge benefit to having people on a centralized platform where you can all share and learn from each other. And obviously, little self-serving because that's what LVEX excels at. But regardless of its LVEX or something else, I think that's a really important part to the equation here. And then lastly, just make it fun. Whether we're talking about AI or anything else work-related, it can be fun. One of my favorite TV shows is Ted Lasso, and there's an episode where one of the star players gets kind of like disgruntled and forgets how fun it was to play soccer or football as a kid. And so coach takes him back to the park where he used to play it as a kid and said, just like, go have fun. It's the same game, right? You're doing the same work, but find the ways to make it fun. And especially with something as creative as AI, I think that can have a huge benefit to unlocking and unleashing what's possible when introducing this technology broadly across the companies. So
Sure.
we'll leave it there. Chris, if you have anything else to add here, otherwise we're to
No,
the
I sounded great. We should probably answer. I think there's a couple of questions. I was just looking at the Q&A. Um, it looks like it might be the same question, but what can practitioners do if there's no executive buying to AI and stringent IT precautions, ways to enhance so clarify, not 0% buy-in, but more like we can't afford that. Can't ChatGPT do everything anyway? What's interesting is in your question you asked about stringent IT security precautions. If someone is stringent about IT precautions, that should be exactly why they don't want you to use ChatGPT by itself, because they actually probably don't want you uploading information about the company or private information up into ChatGPT and actually getting answers back. But in general, what I've discovered in organizations that we're consulting with around AI is if there are people who are leading, but management isn't really buying in yet, lead by doing. Quietly build a track record of usefulness by don't evangelize, demonstrate. Evangelizing actually doesn't work in an organization where you can actually get buy-in. The second thing is to reframe the conversation, move away from the language of AI to things like time saved or, productivity created because of certain things that you're doing. Instead of saying we should be using AI, say things like, I found a way to shorten deck prep by 60% while improving clarity. Want to see? Um, uh, Third, become the prompt architect for your team, right? Even if they won't use the tool, they'll use your outputs. So learn prompt design deeply, offer to create or refine a research brief, a customer-facing FAQ, a rough outline for a colleague's report. Start them as working templates, not AI artifacts. And then use tools that look like work, not AI. The key is to blend in with the stack, right? So use already approved tools like Microsoft Copilot, like extension functions and things like that, and start showing them how that might actually work. And then finally, the number one thing, before and after artifacts. Nothing beats proof of visual transformation. So show how a task went from 4 hours to 20 minutes and show them how the quality improved. When you do all of those and you start putting them in front of executives, I'm telling you, the more you put those in, they will be unable to actually do this, especially if you automate or transform their own personal tasks.
Yeah. And then what else happens with that 3 hours? You just got 3 hours back to take on another project or produce another better outcome for a customer. So yeah, I get really excited about where we can show not just efficiency and cost savings, but absolutely where we can show productivity and revenue. And ultimately, I think that's where you're going to get a lot of excitement from executives and finance and, everybody else there.
Yeah. And the final framing I would give you on this is you don't need to convince leadership to invest in AI today, but you need to become the person they trust when they do. If you can do that from a personal standpoint, it changes everything for you personally and for the organization.
Yeah, lots of career opportunities for people who figure out how to lead the transformational change and ROI across these businesses. Which, good segue. There's a question in the chat. Who should own AI adoption in the org? It's a great question. I think it can be different for different organizations. I'll say what we see a lot of. We see a lot of chiefs of staff. We see a lot of COOs. We see, and the reason I think we see these like chief operator roles tend to take a good interest here is because they generally have a good view across the entire organization. A CRO is going to look just at sort of like the revenue side of the organization. CTO is going to be more skewed toward technology, of course. But often a chief of staff, a COO are just really well positioned to see what's happening, where the opportunities are, where the efficiencies lie, and also like probably has relationships with the other like team level stakeholders that are going to be really important to drive the interest and adoption across the organization. I think it can come from anywhere. Often it comes from committees, but committees hope, generally we want to be accountable to someone, right? So that's what we see most frequently, I would say, but it can absolutely vary from organization to organization depending on who raises their hand, where the expertise lies, and lots of other factors.
There's a comment about a McKinsey State of AI report where 28% of respondents, this is in the chat from Marco, says that 28% of respondents whose organizations use AI report that the CEO is responsible for overseeing AI governance. I have to tell you, consulting with dozens and dozens of very large companies and smaller ones about this, that is lip service. The truth is, when they say the CEO owns it, it just means that the CEO must be bought into it and must come from the CEO down. But the truth is, every organization is different. There are organizations where the COO has ultimate responsibility for kind of driving things forward when it comes to organizational eh, I think that's a nice statement to put in a report, and I think that feels like a that's a very McKinsey thing to say. But the truth is the context of how you actually put things forward is about creating a central AI owner, an AI program office that is supported by the executive leadership. We have found practically it's best housed in the COO's office for operational transformation, the chief transformation officers for long-term reinvention, sometimes the chief innovation officer for culture shifting adoption, or in early stages, the chief of staff function to cross seed across the organization.
I would add also like chief people officer or someone in that organization often is responsible for workforce transformation, so another area. But totally agree with you on. I guess it's a good thing if the CEO is ultimately accountable and getting a report and actually paying attention to things. But we've talked about a lot of tactical efforts in this conversation today, and very likely the CEO for most organizations does not have the bandwidth or probably expertise to the one leading the tactical efforts. So maybe a slightly different question there, but
Yeah.
um, yeah, cool. Well, we're a couple minutes over. I don't think there are any other questions at the moment. So maybe we leave it there.
Cool.
You have our contact info on the screen. We'd love to hear from you. Continue the conversation. If you have questions, please, we'd love to hear and see how we can help. But hopefully this was a good conversation for y'all, and please be in touch. We'll share out the resources once we have them available, and see y'all online.
Yes. Bye-bye.